Welcome back to the Compassionate Capitalist Show. Today, we're going to dig into a topic that I think people forget. What a struggle it is for a founder to navigate all of the different aspects of growth and their own personal growth. And when they bring in, everybody has some level of baggage that they have from their triumphs and failures, their, whatever environmental conditions they grew up in, things that are buried deep in their head. We unpack that as we get older, and we become very reflective. But a lot of times founders are new to, fairly young, particularly when it comes to tech companies, and they're inspired and passionate. After all, they're trying to solve a problem that they feel strongly about. I always say sometimes founders and startups don't know what they don't know. And so it's really great for them to be open to the influence of mentors or advisors that they bring on, their early investors, because in theory, those early investors have traversed challenges and come to the other side. And that's why they have the money and the desire to help another entrepreneur succeed as well. But the road to success is never easy. The emotional stamina and mental toughness to push through the no's from the investor. That's probably one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs will face, and is the double-edged swords of not internalizing the no's, but also learning from the no's as to why there is a no, what would make it a yes. And reflecting that, there may be a change, a pivot, an adjustment that has to be made in the company, a course correction that has to be made. And also there's very early investors that really are the make or break of whether a company is going to get to a next stage of development of their company, next stage of financing, is the I don't want to say personality, but it's sort of the character of the entrepreneur, so how do they receive feedback? How do they internalize that? What is their vision? What is their my way or the highway, their personality? All of those things kind of go into whether that investor that's just meeting that entrepreneur for the first time will trust that entrepreneur to do what they say they're going to do and execute, right? There's setbacks from getting a product market fit correct. You think it's one thing, but you're not getting the revenue and the stuff that you think that you should be getting. But do you change, or is it just the marketing? Is it the product? Is it the marketing? It's the constant worry about cash flow, the dread of firing that employee that just isn't a fit, but now you know them, or maybe they were there with you from the beginning. But then do you try to hire one that and take the time to do that, and then the work doesn't get done? All of that stuff, it weighs heavily on a founder's shoulders. And so today we have an incredible guest, Kenneth Berger. For those that are watching, he's here listening very patiently to me. That is going to help unpack that, because he has been through that fire himself. As a founder, as an early employee of Slack's, one of the earliest key hires, right? He's a 20-year veteran to the tech world, and now he serves as an executive coach to founders. So for the investors listening, if you invested in an entrepreneur that you felt like, man, they had an incredible solution, it's the old A and B, is a B team and an A product, or an A product and a B team kind of a thing, and you just believed it, and they're like, but then it's just, for some reason, it's just not gelling, it's not happening. They've got dysfunctional team, their corporate culture is challenged, there's, they're missing milestones. Maybe that founder team needs some executive coaching. I tell entrepreneurs when I advise them that one of their line items on their use of funds needs to be executive coaching, because they're going to encounter things that they have no idea how to solve, and they can't operate in a vacuum, and they have to be the leader for the people, because the people on their team look to them to know where to go. And so if they're misfiring, then the whole team ends up misfiring. So Kenneth has empowered dozens of leaders from startups like Typeform, Dribble, and Fastly to escape burnout, take a stand for the life that they want, and leave their unique mark on the world. I call it the thumbprint on the world that entrepreneurs would leave. So, I see if I miss anything. Oh yeah, he's got a forthcoming book titled Ask for What You Want, and we will talk about that near the end of the episode. But officially, welcome to the show, Kenneth. So glad to have you on the Compassionate Capitalist Show.
Karen, thank you for having me. It's a beautiful intro. Definitely gives the vibe of all the struggles that these entrepreneurs go through.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So, I was reading on your website, and just, for the record, in case, y'all aren't able to finish listening, Berger, BERGER.com is the website. And on his page, he has startup leaders often face persistent problems that just get worse as the company grows. When they confront them, they stir up interpersonal conflict, avoidant behavior, toxic relationships. When they avoid them, things might seem calmer, but underneath often lurks a deep frustration with themselves and others. Often their fixes don't address the root of the problem. They risk burning out from the stress and missing their big opportunity. And you help them find that path and uncover those problems. The little voice inside, little voice mastery. That's a real challenge. So, Kenneth, tell the audience, how did you experience that directly, and then a coach helped you through it? Did you have a mentor in the organization? What turned you from being the person that was building to the person that is helping others build?
It was really experiencing both the highs and the lows of the entrepreneurial journey myself. Because I worked for Adobe for many years, and I sort of lived the, big company tech lifestyle, and it was comfortable and it was nice, but it wasn't that exciting. It didn't give me the opportunity to put that thumbprint, in the way that you were describing. And so when I went out on my own and did a startup myself with a friend of mine from grad school, when I joined Slack very early on, I had all those opportunities of, riding a rocket ship like Slack, like seeing that, sort of huge growth over the first couple of years. And I had all the heartbreak that comes with those experiences, right? That my co-founder and I broke up, right? This friend that I'd had for 10 plus years, like we don't speak anymore. Um, I had all sorts of conflict with the CEO at Slack, right? Because it wasn't just that I was joining, I was taking his baby away, right? I was the one who was, he loved that product. He had sort of, created it from scratch. And so when he hired someone to lead product, it was really hard for him to let go. And that's a really common experience that I hear from the entrepreneurs I work with now.
So, Kenneth, let me just interrupt real quick and to clarify. So you mean talking about he had been in charge of all the product development, and then now he was hiring a CTO type person or product manager that was going to, like follow sort of the blueprint, but really be much more enmeshed in what the product market fit needed it to be.
Right, because I think, most startup founders at some point come to this conflict, right? Of there's the things we love to do that we're comfortable with, that, we love spending our time on. And then there's all the stuff that maybe we know we need to do, right? That's like, okay, maybe there's some things I can delegate and some things only the CEO can do or only the founder can do. And so they're faced with this dilemma of how do I scale myself and deal with letting go of these things that I like more, that I feel more comfortable with, and sort of lean into these things that maybe I'm less comfortable with, like management or PR or hiring, performance management, or whatever it is. And so, it's not just saying, oh yeah, I'm going to hire someone, I'm going to delegate this whole piece of my business. It's more like, I'm going to give them my baby, right? This thing that I've been investing my heart, my soul into for years. I'm just going to give it to some guy, that I found on LinkedIn. And so that's an emotional process as well as a sort of professional process, right? It's not just the delegation. And I think that going through that really showed me these highs and these lows, that I loved having all that impact of being in the startup world, of working for Slack. And there was just so much suffering, both for me and for people around me, even for the leaders of these companies. And when I thought about my next steps, I was like, all right, I'm a pretty good product person, right? I could lead product at some other company. Or I can actually work on the day-to-day, because honestly, startups, most of them fail, right? Like, this, right? And so the companies come and go, but the people, they move on, right? And so my mission is really around helping those people sort of learn these life lessons so they have the tools to work with those highs and lows and they don't burn out after a year or two, that they can actually make a career of it and do it for 5 or 10 or 20 years and get all the impact that's possible being an entrepreneur without all the pain and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the like where is when you're working with these when these founders and stuff, and there's that link, is there a certain type of predictable pattern that they might be in, that, because a lot of times they start out as sort of the technical, part of being a startup founder for a high growth tech company is that you really have to have that A personality, that driven personality, which also, leads to the uncomfortableness of delegating. So is there a practical way? Because like one of the things I talk about when I'm coaching entrepreneurs that are in that earlier stage is, they don't like to do a business plan. And even now, a lot of your venture capital and those kind of people don't really like to have a business plan. But I say a business plan is really more of your strategy, your blueprint, so that when you hire people, you can, get this marketing person to see your vision and be able to then take their knowledge and input it and integrate it with your vision of what you thought needed to do and talk to you about why something needs to be changed or something like that, or the tech plan, here's the roadmap for the tech plan that and the function that I want to deliver, but then a product manager comes in. So is it what the lack of planning and strategy of a blueprint that creates this challenge in communicating of where they want to go and being able to release that authority to somebody else? Or is it really more of a personality, like I have to be in control, I don't know that anybody can do it as good as I can, and that's where they burn out from having to try to do everything and juggle all these things, and it doesn't get done really well, and they create the frustration with their new hires or their employees or the team that has built it? Or is it both?
I'd say it's both, right? Because the reality is every person is different, and that's part of why coaching is one-on-one, right? Because I can't go into a room and say, oh, I know you're all facing the same challenge, right? Because probably each of them is facing a slightly different version of it, right? Based on their goals, based on their personality, based on the style that's worked for them through their lives. And so I think often the edge that we're working through with entrepreneurs is to say, all right, you have the style that's worked for you up to now, and now you're trying something new. And maybe those tools that are already in your toolbox are not enough. And so we don't need to throw those out, right? All those things are still useful, in a certain context, but maybe we need to expand those set of tools, right? Because if you're used to doing everything on your own, maybe you don't have a set of tools for feedback and performance management and thinking about how do I influence another person to do work for me, even though they're not going to do it exactly the way I want, right? And it's really hard to sort of, micromanage people in that way. And so being able to build those tools, I think part of what's beautiful about it is everyone is a little bit different, sort of what their challenge is. But I'd say broadly, like the big thing that often brings people to me for coaching is exactly what you're describing of, hey, like I'm trying to influence this other person to do this thing, whether it's a customer or an employee or an investor or an executive, and I can't do it. They're saying no, or they're not obeying me in some way or the other. What do? I feel stuck. And so in some sense, like our process is to get unstuck and to sort of find the barriers that are stopping them from moving forward.
Okay, so give an example of changing a path, or finding these, what is it that they're, if they give me, I'm struggling with sort of like, what does that look like, right? So give me an example, our audience an example, if they're struggling with this because maybe it's something as simple as anger, then there's a tool that seems too simplistic. But describe sort of maybe a hypothetical of somebody that you worked with that had this problem, and this is how you help them work through it to find a different way of solving the problem.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of common archetypes that I think are worth outlining. So, speaking of anger, I think, one One are the people who are very good at articulating what they want. They're very good at asking for what they want, but they're not necessarily effective in doing it in a way that other people can hear, right? And so maybe they're putting their voice out there, but people are like, oh, like, you're shouting at me, you're angry, like you're using these raised voices, you're coming at me with a sense of entitlement of like, why didn't you do this? And so, there's a way in which those people are very good at articulating what they want, but they're not usually very effective at getting what they want, right? Because they're doing it in an unskillful way. And I think a underappreciated piece of this process is that they're not necessarily accepting the response. That often when we're trying to influence other people, they tell us no, right? And so even if it's not an explicit no, right? If you try to ask an employee to do something and they don't do it, or they do it late, right? That's kind of an implicit no. They're giving you a no, even if they're not quite saying it directly. And so accepting those no's and really sort of grappling with what that means when somebody tells you no is a really important piece of this process. Because if you're not accepting other people's no's, you're not really incorporating the data. You're just coming in with entitlement saying, no, you have to give me this. Give it to me now. Give it, which we all know is not a great management technique. So I think that's sort of, one, category of challenges I see of people learning to be more effective, being more humble, being less entitled, being more accepting of other people and their boundaries and limitations. Because then, yeah, maybe they can't do it. And so maybe you do let them go. Or maybe when you accept that, hey, like, no, I'm figuring this out, but I need some support. I need to learn. Or maybe I need to do it a little bit my own way. That's the space in which we can learn to work with other people and sort of, find a middle ground where they can be effective and support us in meeting our goals.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is so kind of hidden, but can be really detrimental, is passive aggressiveness, and you find that when you do it on both sides. It can be on the boss side, the founder's side, in the way that they ask for what they want, or how they set the expectation, almost like you should read my mind kind of a thing.
Yep.
And on the other side of somebody saying they're going to do it, when we have this, I forget what the phenomena is right now, but we have like a lot of these employees that are kind of half checked out.
Yeah.
And it seems there's a perception that on one hand, remote workers are even more productive because they have this flexibility. They don't have those issues in the office that make them not want to work there, I guess is the way to say it. But then you also have a founder that is accustomed to seeing things done, that now thinks maybe people aren't doing the work because it's not hitting a deadline, or they're not getting the updates, or people don't know what's happening, which is where I guess kind of Slack was supposed to come in as a tool to like keep people on track, right? I know they had it as a company, it had its own dysfunction that was quite publicized, there for a bit internally. Give some practical tips on how to identify if the issue is really a passive aggressive communication issue, so the response is a passive aggressive response on either side, and how to maybe identify that, and then in a respectful way ask people, because they didn't do it because they just really didn't do it, or they didn't do it because they were feeling like, well, I'm just going to show him, kind of, which is the passive aggressive approach. So how do you handle that?
So it's a great segue, because that really corresponds to that sort of second archetype that I was describing, right? That, if you've got some people that ask too much and too strongly and too, ineffectively, then you also have people that don't ask enough, right? That get a little bashful about asking people directly. And it can definitely come off as passive aggressive, right? Where it's like, oh no, like, I'm fine, I can handle it myself. And then it comes to performance review time, and they say, yeah, I didn't like that I didn't get the support that I was expecting, during this process. And so I think for those people, often the edge is really around just articulating their desires or their needs more clearly. Because I think part of what passive aggression can come from is having this sense that, like, I'm not getting what I need or what I deserve, and I'm sort of, pretending that I'm okay with it, but really I'm not, right? And maybe I'm just not fully grappling with all the feelings that I'm having. And I think the word that to me like corresponds to this most of all is this word fine, right? Because often I ask entrepreneurs, how do you feel about that, right? Like what emotions are coming up around this issue? And they say, either I'm stressed about it or they say, oh, it's fine. I'm fine. And that fine is such a tell that like there's something underneath, because there's something more than fine for any moment, for all of us, right? If like, oh, yeah, maybe I'm a little disappointed, or maybe I'm a little frustrated, or maybe I'm a little worried. And when we start to acknowledge those feelings, even though, we don't talk about feelings so much in the office, but the value of it is those feelings tell us what we want. And if we don't acknowledge those feelings and say that we're fine all the time, then we don't really know what we want. And yeah, it's going to leak out in terms of being passive aggressive, often being overworked. These are the people who are saying, oh, I don't have time for anything, because instead of asking for what they want, they're doing it all themselves, right? And saying, oh, well, I so-and-so is not supporting me in the way I want. So instead of asking, I'm just going to figure it out myself. And I'm going to spend hours in the office and I'm going to say, oh, how do people delegate? How do people scale? I don't know how they do it. And it does come in great part from being willing to articulate that, yeah, I'm not okay on my own, that I do need help, that I do have feelings, that I do have needs, and being willing to say those out loud, which I think feels really vulnerable for a lot of people to say, yeah, I can't do this on my own. I need you.
Okay, so good. So when you're talking about these archetypes, so those are the ones that hero, villain, victim are the startup archetypes that you're talking about?
I think there's different ways to conceptualize it, but really like I really like this sort of two, archetype framing. Like I said, I've been working on my book and iterating on my framework. And when I really look at it high level, like I think, in my mind, it comes down to those two, right? The people that are asking too much or asking too fiercely and sort of getting negative, negative externalities like as a result of that, because they're shouting at their employees, and that's not an effective way to sort of influence people. And the people who aren't asking enough, right? Who are being a little bit passive aggressive, who are not, being a little bit timid in terms of asking or pushing for what they want. And there's great learning on both sides.
So then is the real tool is like the goal is to be able to articulate in a productive way for whoever on the team, whatever that task is that's been assigned, to understand clearly what the expectations are, to get from them what it is they need to accomplish the agreed to goal. And then and if they're unable to do that because of a control issue, a confidence issue, a communication style issue, then that's when somebody like yourself as a coach helps them unpack why it is that they're unable to communicate effectively, because either they were always yelled at as a child, so they think that the only way to communicate is to yell, or not even getting into the difference between men and women and their communication styles, but just what is that kind of where it is? You like there's a common set of goals of the right way to team and build and scale. The fundamentals, the blocking and tackling, the framework is there. And when there's a misconnect within getting into that framework, then it has to unpack what's happening that keeps the peak performance for that founder and the other people on the team and the way they collaborate.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that the way I think about it is that asking for what you want is easy in theory, right? Just articulate what you want, say, okay, like this is my need, say it out loud, say like, will you please do this, right? And then listen to the response and accept like whether they say yes or no, right? Sounds so simple, right? But the challenge, I think, often for entrepreneurs and really for everyone is all the stories that we have that make us resist that, right? So, we just talked about articulating what you want. You might say, oh, well, I'm fine, right? Like I'm fine on my own. I don't need other people, or I don't think about feelings. I don't talk about feelings. So it doesn't feel comfortable for me to talk about feelings. So there's already a bunch of reasons that we might not feel comfortable articulating what we want, right? And so part of the process that we go through is helping people work through that. Because yeah, guess what? If you want to get something accomplished in the world, you're going to have to be able to articulate it to yourself first, which sounds so simple and so easy, but it really is hard depending on the personality and the beliefs that they're holding. And similar with the other steps, right? That we often have these stories that say, oh, this is why I can't ask other people for help, that, I need to be able to do things on my own, or it's too presumptuous or too rude, or they should already know, I shouldn't have to ask. There's all sorts of stories we might have, right? Or, maybe there's an entitlement story of they can't say no, they're my employee, they should just do what I say no matter what. But people have free will. Everybody can say no whenever they want, even if they are your employee. The question is, what are the consequences, right?
Yeah. So how do you weave innate biases into overcoming those communication challenges? Because there's definitely biases that exist based on, could be race, could be sexual bias, could be, age bias. It could be all kinds of different things when you have a diverse team that's in theory working towards a common goal of, leaving this thumbprint, accomplishing this passion, this problem that the company is solving in the marketplace.
Well, I guess it depends sort of, whose perspective we're coming from, right? I think that when I work with entrepreneurs, who are, women or people of color, I think often the work that we have to go through is both to say, yes, like the sexism and the racism that you're experiencing is absolutely real, right? To offer them that validation of like, yeah, this thing you're experiencing is real. It's hard. It's frustrating. Whatever feelings you have around those experiences are totally valid. And we don't get to snap our fingers and make the world different. And so, we're going to need to figure out how to move forward despite those challenges. And yeah, maybe you choose to switch to a different team or change to a different company, or, change the way that you relate to people, or, ask for, whatever changes you might want to make. But part of, I think, the challenge of moving forward in, entrepreneurship is that you can both face these challenges that are incredibly, frustrating and difficult, like sexism and racism, and you need to be able to grapple with the reality of them enough to move forward anyway, even though it is so frustrating, because so much of, the tools that we need to sort of be successful in the entrepreneurial journey are just emotional management, right? Of like, it's going to be so stressful and so hard for 100 different reasons, and how do I move forward anyway, instead of crawling up into a ball and giving up?
Yeah, or having a revolving door of people coming into the company because maybe the founder has the bias. And so they're hiring people based on a skill set, and they don't think they have a bias. But then when that employee answers it or communicates in a certain way, they're frustrated because they're of their own bias and they're not acknowledging that. They think that the female employee, male boss, female employee is always whining.
Yeah.
Because they're saying they need this or they can't do this, or it's like, just suck it up and do the job, kind of a thing. But it's really, they're trying to express that they need that support. And so then that, or whatever they assume, even though the person may have graduated from a pristine school in, MIT tech, whatever kind of a thing, but because they're have an accent, or they're, they don't, so their verbal skills aren't as great because of their mastery of the English language, and they assume that they're not as smart. Like,
Mm-hmm.
There's certain countries, but also, as a Southerner, right? There's an assumption that the Southern accent means that you're not as smart, right?
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like the nature of it. So it doesn't even have to be some other country's accent, kind of a thing. But there is just, I mean, so do you, when you're first starting with somebody and they're saying that these problems, because sometimes also the founder doesn't think it's their problem, it's the other people's problem. So how do you help them reflect on themselves to see that, to uncover that that they're having a bias that is impacting the effectiveness of their employees?
It's a great question. So to me, this connects back to this idea of entitlement, or just, even more simply, like the sense of like, I'm right about this and everybody else is wrong about this. I think everybody can relate to this, right? Of like having that feeling of like, I'm I have so much conviction. I'm 100% right. They're 100% wrong. And so this is one of these things that's counterintuitive about influence, right? That I think a lot of people say, oh no, before I ask for something, I need to be 100% confident that it's right, because otherwise, like, what leg do I have to stand on to ask? And that actually can be deeply counterproductive, because if you're coming into an ask with this deep level of entitlement of like, oh boy, I have all these reasons why my ask is right and why they should say yes, and they have to say yes, and they're totally unreasonable if they say no, then gosh, like, we're going to be really frustrated and disappointed when inevitably people tell us no, because again, mostly the first response to an ask tends to be no, almost all the time, right? And so it can really be valuable to come in the opposite way, to say, you know what, like, I've got a piece of feedback, say, right? But I don't know that it's right. It's just my personal experience, right? So I'm just going to share it, not saying that my way is right and your way is wrong, but that, hey, just so you know about my personal experience is this wasn't effective, and I would prefer that you do it a different way in the future. But I get that you have your own style, and you can take or leave that feedback as you see fit. And so I think a lot of people don't like giving that type of feedback because it feels wishy-washy or weird, or like, oh, shouldn't I justify like why my point of view is right and theirs is wrong? But actually giving it in that really humble, unentitled, I don't know if I'm right way is actually what can make people feel more open to that feedback. And so I think when it comes to bias, that can be really helpful, where instead of coming in saying like, oh, that's unprofessional, the way you're wearing your hair or the way that you're talking, right? And coming in with this entitlement of like, I know that that's wrong and you're wrong for doing it, to be able to come in and say like, hey, I have a worry, and not making it about them and them being wrong, but hey, I'm worried that when you wear your hair that way, that people are going to take it the wrong way. I might be totally wrong. Maybe this worry
Yeah.
is just in my head.
I was thinking more about the job getting done, not so much appearances, but it's you it more like when they answer the question and you don't really understand it, and you don't take time to understand it because you don't understand them clearly, or their way they communicate via writing because they're asking for help, but you don't understand that they're asking, I just need to clarify such and such, but they're really asking for help without being direct as asking for help. So a deeper level of the results versus just physical appearance. You know what I mean? You don't Somebody's heavy, so your bias is that they're lazy, or they don't do the work, where and so when it comes in and something happens and they miss a deadline, or they're not getting you timely reports, they may be working really hard, but they don't know how important you want the status update is. So because there's a bias there, you assume that they're not doing the work when they're really doing the work all along. They're just not communicating it in the way that you were expecting, because you didn't tell them you wanted a end of day report every day, or they think an end of day report every day is overkill. They must not just let me do my job. If I spend an hour doing a report every day, then I'm not doing my job that you're trying to get me done, and it's unproductive. So I'm going to give you a report every 3 days because I'm getting my work done. Right. And so, but it's never spoken about, the stuff, particularly maybe in the remote, whatever. I'm just saying that to me, that I see that as there's biases are most often, except for, sexual harassment stuff or racial, is not spoken out loud. But it dictates your perception of somebody's quality of work sometimes, or you assume that they aren't going to be able to get it done. So you're constantly peppering them on a status of it, of what's going on, or because you haven't really released control for the delegating, you're smothering them. Right. But there's, for you to unpack that as a coach, because it's not a blatant thing that said that they came straight out and said, I don't think this person is capable of doing the job because of the way they wear their hair. You know what I mean? That's like really not a disconnect, where it's much more deeper, as to, some other type of bias that may be influencing their, because HR hired this person, because of
Yeah.
their skill set, but you don't have and the person that used to do the job that left, you clicked with, and you don't click in the same way with this person. So you're trying to figure out why you don't click. And then up underneath there, because some of your stuff said you help them unpack that to develop other tools for addressing it. So I'm trying to get into how do you help them unpack if part of the problem is that they have a unspoken bias.
Yeah. So, I think at the very basic level, certainly part of what I do for clients is be a mirror, right? To say, hey, I don't know if you are experiencing this yourself, but I'm experiencing you as having a bias about X, right? Does that resonate for you? Do you recognize that? Do you see this idea that, it seems like you might be holding around, what this person's background means? Right. So I think that's one very simple thing that the coaches can certainly do, is sort of provide that mirror so people can consider that. If like, wow, I don't know if I knew that about myself, but I can see, yeah, maybe that is something that I'm holding unconsciously.
Yeah, even like college, like you think about somebody that drops out of college because they're brilliant in developing something, and then they hire these MIT people, and or a Harvard person, or what kind of a thing, and the education bias, right? So there's all kinds of biases that underlie. That's the thing I thought was so fascinating about your description of your coaching, is because you help them uncover their expectations or the baggage that they're bringing to the table that affect their relationships with other people while they're trying to, and it could be their own insecurity because they don't have that college education, and they're building this organization that is surrounded by college educated people. And so that's why they yell, or something,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, you're right. And it is so, amazingly unpredictable, right? Sort of what stories people are holding in their heads because of their background or their experiences for whatever reason, and these beliefs are almost always unconscious, at least to start with, to say, to have this belief of, oh, I didn't go to a top 20 college, so I'm not smart, and other people are smart, and so I don't do smart people things. Right. And so it might be something that, no one would say out loud, but there's something that they're acting out unconsciously. Or, oh, I don't get to ask for what I want. That's presumptuous. That's rude. And so, I just do everything myself. Or, I hint and hope for what I want, but I never actually say it out loud. And that's what I was taught was polite and right. Or maybe even, I'm really worried about people liking me, and knowing that everyone likes me and no one's mad at me is the way I feel safe in the world. And I'm already doing a really scary out there thing by doing a startup. And so I'm really worried about feeling safe otherwise, because otherwise I'm doing a lot of risky stuff. And so these strategies that we have to feel safe and comfortable, they can be useful. And often when we're trying to do something new like this, they can be liabilities. And so part of what we do is really just bring them into the conscious so we can examine them and say, is this belief still serving me? Right. Or am I, like it turns out it doesn't matter where you go to college, right? Like it's about, can you do the job? Can you get it done? Right.
Yeah.
And so often we'll sort of, look at that and say, yeah, what's a new belief I could adopt instead? And that's something we'll practice, because they'll have that sort of impulse to go back to the old belief, and we'll say, okay, next time that old belief comes up, we're going to not say, oh, that's bad or that's wrong, or believe it blindly. We're going to say, oh, like I'm doing that thing again, right? I'm doing that thing I talked about with Kenneth. And you know what? I decided like, I'm not going to believe that anymore. I don't like who I am when I believe that. I don't like the results I get when I believe that. And guess what? I get to change my beliefs. I can believe whatever I want. And so now I'm going to believe that it's about the results and it doesn't matter where you went to college.
Yeah. Or me having to prove that I know I'm smarter than these people, but I don't have the credentials. So I've got to work harder and accomplish more so I can prove that I'm smarter than them. Right. So
Exactly.
it's uncovering. So that's the hidden power of the great ask for startup founders, is figuring out the belief system that's dictating their actions and communication styles.
I think it's one sort of great way to sort of move past resistance, right? Because again, asking is easy, right? The hard part is getting past our internal resistance. And so you're right that making those sort of unconscious internal stories conscious, and then being able to work with those and actually start to shift into a new set of beliefs, yeah, that often is the bulk of the work of not, not because people think, oh no, there must be a 5-step process. I just don't know about it. I'm like, no. There's no secret 5-step process. It's about our own internal barriers that are sort of more, nuanced and unconscious. And even if we want to change them, it takes time, right? It's less like, oh, just reading an article and, finding a new process, and more like going to the gym. Like, you need to go back and go back and go back and train your body and train your mind to shift to this new belief, because it's in such a habit to believe this other thing that's not necessarily serving you anymore.
So that as we wrap up here, is that so the underlying message of ask for what you want, and that you're it's unpacking the belief systems so that you are capable of asking for what you want?
To me, I think of it as working through internal resistance is sort of the process of doing it, because the process is of asking itself is easy, and the hard part of actually making it real in your life is working through the internal resistance. And so I think part of that is actually identifying those beliefs in yourself and doing that sort of practice work to practice shifting those beliefs. And part of it is really just finding the sort of motivation for what you really care about to make the change. Because guess what? Like, sometimes we ask for things we don't care about that much. It's like, oh, can you pass me the broccoli? Oh, you don't? Okay, no big deal, right? And so a lot of it comes down to, how badly do you want it? Like, how how does it connect to these sort of ideas of like who you are and what impact you want to make in the world, like that thumbprint question. And so to me, it's both sides. It's how do we increase the motivation, right, to get you really excited about the potential future you're creating, and how do we reduce that resistance, right, those forces inside of you that are pulling you back from really going for what you want in a big way.
Okay, sounds great. So look for that book. When's the book supposed to come out? The Ask for What You Want? You don't know at this point. I know that process.
I was going to say, Karen, you know the answer to that question. The answer is when it's ready.
Early next year, right? Okay, very good. Anything else you'd like to leave with our audience? Any golden nuggets before we say goodbye?
No, this was really fun. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So to the audience, a couple things here coming after the show to listen to, and onwards and upwards. Thank you very much, Kenneth, for being on the show, the Compassionate Capitalist Show. And remember, it's kberger.com. You can find it in the show notes. Also, I'll put a link in there for the leaving your thumbprint on the world. It's a flowing a Prezi presentation from Wimber Prezi, but it was that I did a long time ago that I love it. It's just, I wish I could get it to autoplay, because then it'd be a lot more effective. Anyhow, thank you so much, Kenneth, and look forward to continuing to stay in touch and seeing where we go with this.
Likewise. Thanks again.